So this video will explain how to use snippets in Dreamweaver. Snippets are basically blocks of code that you can save into a folder in Dreamweaver that you can readily access anytime you need to. The idea here is that you can have complicated and very specific sets of information in the code that you will use repeatedly, so you can actually just click into your snippets area and have it inject that code into your file whenever you need it. To give you an example of this, you'll see here that we have one here that is a break with a style of clear both. But it's something that I use often enough that I want to have it easily available to me so I can just inject it every time I need it, and I don't have to hand type it each time. To give you an example of what this one would do, let me show you. So you'll see this file here has an image that's been created in a div that has a float to the left, and you've got all the content sitting to its right. Now the problem with this is this is something that's very, very common that we would do, but maybe you'll have more than one of these. For example, right here, this would go for my bio and my name, and I'll have a photo next to it. But what if I've got someone right underneath me? The problem with that is that without a table, which we don't want to use when you're using it for responsive design, is that once you do this, you need to put it in a table, otherwise the content that sits below it ends up floating also. So let me just show you what happens if I were to copy this and then paste it again, thinking, oh, well, this should go right underneath it. Problem with it is that because this is floating and it's still got space right next to it, it will actually shift everything to there. That's not something you really want to do. Normally in the past, what we would do is create a table where a row would consist of one cell for this and one cell for this content, and then another row would be created right after that, which would push all of this content down. That's not something that's really available to you when you're not using tables, except for if you can use that clear break that I just talked about. So what you can do is actually just copy that for now, bring it in here, and then paste it right after the end of that div. Now while the code isn't showing it to be accurate in this regard, you can double check just to make sure that what we're talking about is accurate, and you'll see here that it's now pushing the content down afterward, and it's creating that break that's actually sitting right in here. Now what that does is it essentially says there's a break right after this paragraph, and it will clear to both sides, meaning nothing can float to the left of that object and nothing can float to the right of it. It's essentially an invisible barrier that is vertical between the two of these. Now I could easily just grab this copy right here and take that, and every time I needed to make a new one of these, just paste it each time. But maybe I'm not going to be working in this same file every time, and I need to actually have that code available to me for any file that I'm working on. So what I can do is just copy that and create a snippet. So over here, once you've created a folder, you'll see I've created a formatting folder here. You do that by just creating the new snippet folder. Just click on that folder and you can actually create a snippet within that. So right down here you'll see it, there's an option that says new snippet. Just go ahead and click on that. What I'm going to name this one is a clear break. Now you can leave a description in here to describe what it is that you're doing. I find this to be most common when creating a snippet that is going to look very similar to another one in its name or what it does, but maybe slightly different, so you might want to have a description in there that describes that slight difference. Now since I've already copied this, it will include that in the insert before area. Now there's two options here that we have available. There is wrap selection and insert block. Now the insert block, what that does is it inserts just whatever code that's in there automatically into wherever you double click. So if you go ahead and create it as a block, it just puts it right there. So that's what we're going to want here, because a clear break doesn't have any sort of before and after. And we'll cover that in just a second. So click OK. So now I have a clear break that's ready for me to use. So if I were to do this again, say this was not in there, you'll see everything's kind of floating. So go ahead and click right there, and then you just double click the clear break, and you'll see it actually created the clear break in the code for me and did what it needed to do. So going back to the snippets file, you'll see it created many different snippets that I use on a regular basis, and I'm going to just go through each one of those right now that might help you understand why we use it and then how helpful it can be for you. The second one that I use is a two-column div. Now essentially all this is two divs right next to each other with a very, very specific set of classes that we've added. Now, these two classes that I've got right here are standard classes that I've created in all of my websites that have CSS that define what they are. That definition, for the most part, on all of these sites is that both are 50% wide, so they sit right next to each other when at full width, and then they will actually be 100% wide when they're at mobile width, so they stack on top of each other. This is something we've covered before, but it's important to note that I don't want to have to redo this every single time, especially when creating, for example, a list of items or a set of sponsors that are two-column. There are a lot of times where you need to do it more than once. A good example of that being a course schedule. What you can do is just do this version of the two-column div and then do a find and replace. Basically what you can do is you can use this code to repeatedly put in all of that information with the classes right off the bat. There is, you'll notice, a break in here with a clear both. That's important to note whenever creating these things, so you can actually, if you're trying to make two columns of information, that the two columns don't start overlapping each other as you go down due to the floats. So if I were to copy this, and I'm going to go back into my snippets and create a new one. Just make sure I've got the formatting folder selected. Say new snippet. Okay, you'll again notice that it already dropped in the content where I need it. I'm just going to name this div underscore 2 calls. Now this is just telling me that it's a two-column div because I know I'm going to create more in the future. So click OK. And now I know whenever I'm in a file and I need to create two divs, I can just double-click, creates that, double-click, 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 and it'll keep going right down the line, adding all of the code that I need every single time. Moving ahead, in a very, very similar fashion, you'll see there is a three-column div that I have in this file. It is essentially the exact same thing, except for instead of them splitting at 50% each, they split at 33% each, and there's three columns. There is a slight bit of difference in the CSS, but that's not what the snippet is for, because that content is already created and sitting on the website already. This just corresponds to the CSS that I've made and the classes that are in here. So there's already a class call left third, call center third, call right third on the websites. I don't need to do that as a snippet because I don't need to make it more than once. Moving down, there's another different style of snippet that I use here. You'll see right here where I've got a div for a left floating image, and that's exactly what this is. All I'm doing here is saying this is a div with a class of image float left, but you'll notice that instead of it being just a whole block of code with beginning and end divs, and it's just something that I insert into the code and it's just there, is that this one's a little bit more important because it actually wraps around something. So if you'll notice on this floats and clears thing, I've got this image right here, and there's content on either side of it. So the image is wrapped in a div, and you can do that with code in the snippets area. So say, for example, I've got this code right here, and I want to actually insert snippet around it. So what I can do is create a snippet to adjust that, but I can actually tell the snippet whenever I've got an area selected and then I insert the snippet, it will add a block of code in front of what I've selected and then another block after it, so it can actually still wrap around items. This is very, very helpful when you're creating a div or any sort of thing that has a opening and a closing tag that needs to be on either side of the content you're providing. And I'll cover a few of those now. So for example, we've got the one here with the image float left. And let's just go ahead and take an image out and put it just by itself here. We'll clear everything out. So I've got an image here, and say I actually want to make sure that that does that. Now just to clear this up, because it did create it when I removed it out of the area here, I just want to make sure it's just a blank image and nothing else. So I've just got an image. Now if I want to add that code, what I can do, I'll go ahead and copy the div class portion of this and create a new snippet. So I'm just going to name this one img underscore float underscore left. Now this is where the important part comes in that's different from the ones I've already shown you, is that this one will insert in front div class equals image float left. Now what I also need to do is that because I'm going to be wrapping it around, if I were to just use this, it would insert that portion of it, but it would never close the tag of the div, so it wouldn't work very well. So on the after portion, just go /up and say OK. So now that that exists, I can go over to my float clears, and you'll see right here, I've got that there. So I just select what I want to be wrapped first. So I want all of this content here is what I want to be wrapped. So just do that and then double click my image float left. And now there's a div surrounding it. You'll see that it's got the div class equals image float left, and the image is inside of it, and then it ends with the div on the other side. This is handy for adjusting images, especially if you need to wrap it in a div in order to make it mobile responsive. You can also be a little bit more elaborate with it in terms of how you want to add content or frame content, in terms of if you need to add a box around some content or you need to just have a div that's very specific around a certain item. That you can absolutely do. And let me show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going back to the snippets here. I'm going to skip past these because these two right here are the exact same, just one floats left, one floats right. I've got these green box snippets in here as well. Now sometimes when I've got a paragraph that's important that I need to maybe put at the top of an event or a page that's important for them to read, I want it to be more accentuated and easier for them to see. For example, if an event sells out, I want it to be very, very visible at the top. And I want it to be even more visible than just having red text or something like that. Maybe that doesn't work for that page. So what I can do is I've created a div here that does merge in the exact same way with the wrapped selection, but it creates a whole area of a box around a piece of content. So I'll give you an example of that. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the first portion of the div, and I know all I'm wrapping after it is the end div, so I don't need to copy that. And I'm going to go ahead and create this, and you'll see this one is for green box, and it's code I've already included. So create new, say green box, and then I'm going to wrap a selection. I just want to make sure that I end the div. So basically whatever I select is going to be wrapped in a div that's essentially a green box. So let me go ahead and just grab some content here, and I'll show you what I mean on the design side. So I'll just create some space, maybe put in a big box here. Now I've got a paragraph here, and you'll see if I select the whole paragraph and then I add this green box around it. Now it's all I've done is now I've got a quick way of creating this green box, and it's good to go. That's it. All I need to do is walk in here and say, okay, I've got this paragraph here, should be accentuated with a green box. Now I can do the exact same thing again with other versions of this, and you'll see in the snippets here I've got one for a red box and one for a yellow box. Same things. Maybe it's more important, and you'll notice here I've got those built, and you'll see how those work. So essentially, if I've got something maybe that's sold out, I usually put it in red and say, stop, sorry, this event's sold out. So I would just put in text, this event is sold out, double click on the red box snippet that I have over here, and I'm done. That's all we need to do because it's already styled in every way I need to do it. You will notice for these green box, red box, and yellow box items, I do have it all as an inline style. That's a personal preference thing, since these were done actually before we started doing mobile responsive work at Ewald. You can absolutely just make these classes if you want to change how it looks in mobile versus full width. I highly recommend that if you want to do that. All you would do is take this style out, the style equals border blah 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 blah, and change it out to a class equals yellow box, and then just define what yellow box is in your CSS, define what red box is in your CSS. All of these things will take care of themselves if you do it that way. This way, it's just something that I know it's already full width. It's going to be full width on any of the items I use, so I don't really worry about it for these. But if you decide that's something you want to change from mobile to full, you absolutely can do that for anything you're working on. You just have to make sure you put that in as classes as opposed to inline styles like these are. So moving down the list, you'll see another option here for a read more class. This is something that I do on a regular basis for any of my sites, where if I've got a specific button that I want to create, I've already created a pretty extensive amount of CSS on most of the websites that I manage that defines what a quote-unquote read more button is. So all it is a CSS class for read more. So if I've got content that I want to say, okay, well this is going to be that, so maybe I've got this here, so find out more. And it's a link. So if I do that and I make it a link, so now I've got this text here, but I want to make sure that it looks just like any of my other read more buttons that exist on any of these other sites. So all I need to do is if I've got a link that I want to make sure it looks like that, I've got this here, I go ahead and click in this area, and then I just want to make sure I'm inside the link tag, and I can just go in there and put in that snippet. So you can insert code inside any other code if you need to as well. So let me just show you how that works. Let me go up here, grab the class equals read more. I do include spaces on both sides just so it doesn't sit up against anything else, and that can obviously get confusing or mess with the code if it is. So I'm fine with having 2 spaces in a spot. Obviously it's better to have 2 spaces than no spaces. So go ahead and copy that out, create a new snippet, call it read more. It added everything I need to. I'm going to make that an insert block so it's not adding anything afterward. And then I'll click OK. So now if I've got this content right here and I want to go right there, just go ahead and click inside of that, double click read more, and move on. So the code's there. All it needs to do is that, and I can just quickly do that and keep going. Next up are a few things that we don't typically use as much anymore, but we do still use them in email, so they're very, very handy. And that's actually just a quick version of a table with 1 row and 2 columns and 1 row with 3 columns. So they're evenly spaced except for a few minor things, which I prefer to do when I'm creating tables this way. You'll notice in the code here we've got this content. It's a full width table, so it says 100% with no border, no spacing, no padding. The only thing that's important, and you'll see in here, is that I've slightly offset the width on the first one to be 52%, so it sits a little bit farther over to the right than exact medium. And that's because what I do is I've got a style in there, and I do leave this as a style because we're not working in mobile responsive since we're using a table, is I'll create a style with a padding right of 2 ems. Now basically you'll notice right here all that's doing is creating the exact same 2 columns that I need, but it's giving me enough space on there so if I were to grab content and paste it in there, it's not going to go right up against the edge of the line. Now the right one doesn't do that. The right one goes right to the edge, so if I need to, it's all good to go. But what you'll notice is that this one is 48%. And the reason I do that is that this right here is on average maybe about 2% difference between the two of them, or excuse me, 4%, because I'm going 2 from this side and 2 from this side. Now what that does is if I go ahead and paste that same content in there, when you're looking at it on a page, it doesn't look like if you went with 50% and 50%, this would sit a little bit too narrow because it's already got this gap right here taken out of it. Now you could balance those out if you wanted to, where you create 1em on this side and then 1em on this side, but that's a little bit more code and I don't really want to worry about it for the most part. So when I'm creating a table and I want to make sure that it's 2 evenly spaced columns, I'll just go ahead and use this snippet right here to create a table with 1 row and 2 columns, and that way if I ever need to do anything more, or if I need to make more columns out of that, it's fine, because what I can do is just hit Command M and it just keeps adding tables or table rows above it that are the exact same thing. So if I'm going in there and pasting, it's all still got that padding in there from creating that first one. Now to go back and clear all this out, that is the exact same thing we did with this table with 1 row and 3 columns. It's just done to a different amount of percentages. So in this case, what we've got is 100% wide, no padding, no spacing, no border, but the first 2 columns are 34% and the last one is 32 because the first 2 columns now have that right padding built into them. One thing about YM is that it often strips out a lot of the padding and any sort of thing you've done in any of these anyway. So if you're working on a website and you need to actually use a table for whatever reason, obviously we try to encourage you to use divs if whenever possible, since they're a little bit easier to work with in terms of mobile responsive, but there are a few times here or there that you actually do need to just absolutely use a table. In that case, there are a couple of snippets down here that do something slightly different than the ones above, which is that when you create these ones up here and you try to maybe put in padding, YM will strip that out entirely and it just will ignore it, unless it's in a style on its own. So if you create an inline style, it will actually hold. So you'll notice here, if I've got this 2 column one right here and I paste it, there's a little bit more spacing, and I'll show you what the difference is here. So let me go ahead and click on this one above it and do that, and you'll notice this one goes right up to the edge, and this is what it would actually look like if you just added padding as a padding equals 5 in YM, because it strips it out. This one will actually add just a tiny bit of padding. You'll notice there's 5, 2, 5, 5, which is 5 on the top, 2 M's on the right, so it's still keeping that 2 right there, and then 5 on the bottom, 5 on the left. So you get a little bit more space, a little bit more breathing room off the edge there. Now the same thing is true with this one below here, which uses 3 columns, and it's doing all the exact same things there. Now again, for each one of these, all I would do to create a snippet is copy this out, and this one here is YM with 1 row and 3 columns. So I'll create another one here, and this is a block, so I'll go ahead and insert it as a block and say YM table. Now I'm using underscores here because it's easier for me to see and read it. You can use hyphens however you want to do it, totally your call. Okay, then I click OK. Now I've got the content I need for that, so if I ever wanted to make another one, I could just come down here, double click, and now I've got my YM one with 3 columns. Now you can feel free to do this with whatever code you feel that you're going to use on a regular basis, and all you do is just come in here, create it, and then every time you need to insert it into your design side, you just double click and it'll add it. You can just keep doing it repeatedly, and it'll just keep adding more. So if I double click, double click, double click, this is creating a new table every single time, and I don't have to worry about it.